Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Boy, you got that feel of day before the big game vibes. That's really fun. A lot on Georgia, Alabama. I feel like the drama involving Nick Saban and his involvement or lack of involvement in this game on Saturday is far from done. I'm going to give you a couple of clues from Saban's own mouth about that off the top of the program. This is actually pretty interesting. We'll do this here momentarily. Fun look back at what led Richard LeCounte to help usher in the Stetson Bennett era at Georgia. That's kind of a cool thing we'll do on today's show. Jeff Sintel, as per usual, as we go on the road with him today, assisted by AAA, and our buddy Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. I am going to put him on the witness stand on today's show. Whatever nonsense chicanery Alabama's trying to pull this weekend, Mike's going to be forced to tell us here on the broadcast today. Former Crimson Tide All-American. He's a good friend, and I love the opportunity to welcome back here to our program. So we are jam-packed, fully loaded. No reason to hesitate. Let's get it started. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger. Fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we've been doing a lot of video shows the last couple of days beyond just DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, which you're watching or listening to right now. And the subject of what Nick Saban's involvement is going to be on this game on Saturday. And every now and then when this kind of comes up, people will come in the comment section and they'll say, well, BA, you've got to understand, there is a rule that's been written that says coaches that are not a part of the game, and right now that's the most common assumption about Saban because he has tested positive for the coronavirus, that he won't be there. And the very letter of the law rule, and we read this to you yesterday as it had been reported on by AL.com, is that there's no contact allowed from like 90 minutes before the game to 90 minutes after the game. And I think some Georgia fans have kind of assumed that was that. It was just as simple as that. I'm here to tell you it is not going to be that simple, I don't think anyway, when it comes to Georgia and Alabama on Saturday. It certainly seems like that Alabama and its coach Nick Saban are still working very hard to pull out whatever stop could possibly be found to find some way for Nick Saban to still be involved in this game on Saturday, despite the fact that he has tested positive for the coronavirus. So you need to be paying very close attention to what's going on in Tuscaloosa, listening to the things that Nick Saban is saying, and on guard for anything ahead of the game on Saturday. First of all, the rule that I just mentioned there, Saban himself has read that rule, and he is not happy about it, as he said last night on his coach's show. Take a listen to this.
The protocol is if you're in quarantine, you can't have any remote access to the sidelines, and you can't go to the game even if they put you in an isolated area. So never having thought much about that, and I'm not being critical of anybody here, if you're the head coach, there ought to be a better way to do it. I don't know exactly what that is, but there should be a better way to do that. You ought to be able to have some kind of communication with the sidelines.
So Nick Saban says, listen, I know this rule is there. Forgive me for not having read this before, but now that it personally impacts me, maybe there's a better way we could do this than if I can't be in the stadium, have me totally isolated away and not involved in this game at all. The wheels are turning here about how Alabama can get some sort of unusual circumstances waiver or whatever else that, kind of happens in the age of the coronavirus. Interesting to hear, though, Nick Saban criticizing the rule that will prohibit his involvement if he is not there at the stadium on Saturday, a rule that I say exists for good reason. I don't have a problem if Saban turns up, negative tests, things like that, and if he were to be in the stadium, I got no problem, with that whatsoever. But I've said before, for a number of reasons, I don't like the idea of anyone trying to coach a game from outside the stadium. I think processing the information becomes a little bit easier, and an extra advantage, I think, is more easily gained when you are kind of outside the controlled stadium environment. I think that rule, in other words, exists for a reason. But here's the thing you should understand about Nick Saban. Nick Saban is such a selfless guy. Nick Saban's not arguing this because of his own selfish needs, his desire to coach, his desire to control every facet of what goes on Saturday. You should know that's not what Nick Saban is thinking about at all here. Nick Saban, as he explained last night during his coach's show, this is really about trying to take pressure off of his assistants. You see, this is something that Nick Saban, he says, is doing for other people's benefit, not his own. This is Nick Saban again.
I just think it's really tough that if you have to make a close call, I would just hate to see somebody on our staff have to make a close call and get criticized for it if it didn't work, because I don't think that's fair to them, if you know what I mean. I understand the game. If you make a call and it works, it's a good call. If you make a call and it doesn't work, it's a bad call. All right, so it's as simple as that. I get that. All right. You know, if an assistant on your staff has to make one of those kind of calls and it doesn't work, I'd hate to see someone have to get criticized for something that probably shouldn't even have been their responsibility to make that call to start with.
Yeah, Nick Saban would just hate that if one of his assistants got criticized. I mean, after all, you've never seen Nick Saban criticize one of his own assistants during a game. Nick Saban would hate that. This is all about selflessness on the part of Saban, wanting to take pressure away from those assistant coaches who might have to make some tough decisions they're not used to having make. See, Nick Saban isn't thinking about his own desires here. He's thinking about everybody else's desires, or at least that's what he would have you believe. But here's the most important thing to know about all of this. When it comes to Saturday, what has been treated as a cut and dry deal of, well, Nick Saban's got coronavirus, so therefore he's not involved in this game at all. If you listen very, very closely, that is not exactly the way that Saban sees this himself right now. These next few words you're about to hear from the Alabama coach, I think, are important, at least in the early stages of Friday, when we're still processing all this information. Here's Nick Saban again.
I would hate not to be at the game on Saturday if that's what this turns out to be. And I would hate not to be, at least to have a headset where I could communicate with the sidelines, even if you're in the press box in isolation. Even if you couldn't go in the locker room and communicate with the players, you could still Zoom with the players. So there's ways to do this where you wouldn't be putting anybody in harm's way. But, you know, I also really believe in the safety of all the people, not just the players on our team or the coaches. So there would have to be some logistical things that could be worked out so that you could do something like that.
So if you heard that correctly, what you heard Nick Saban say there is, I'd hate to not be at the stadium if that's what it turns out to be. Nick Saban not exactly waving the white flag of surrender on this yet. Sources close to Alabama have reported that if he does get that series of negative tests that are kind of ongoing every day right now, there is still a small window by which Saban could be there. I would say the drama involving Nick Saban and his potential involvement in this game on Saturday is far from done. All right, let me shift gears to this. One of the other big topics all week long has been, if Saban doesn't coach on Saturday, how much does Alabama lose because of not having Saban? And someone who made a very articulate point about this, and really a pretty emphatic point, was former Georgia great David Pollack, now an ESPN analyst. Pollack on ESPN this week has said that if Nick Saban's not there, it hurts Alabama in more ways than one. Pollack very clear in his opinion on this. Take a listen to the former Dawg.
Saban's not a caretaker. Like, he's not a guy that's just the rah-rah guy and doesn't have his hands in on everything. Everything runs through Nick, like everything. And talking to, like, I talked to a coach that was at Alabama, that one of the things that was surprising, the coin toss is directed by him. Which way they're going to kick, warm-ups, like everything that goes on, injured players, everything goes through Nick Saban. So this will definitely be different. And I think just from a presence standpoint, how many times have we seen Nick chew guys out on the sidelines, chew coaches out on the sidelines, and bring energy and not take certain things? And the guys are you're always looking over like, oh God, like Dad's mad at me. Like, I got to make sure I step up my game. So I think this is huge. There are some coaches that it wouldn't be as big of a deal. This is an enormous deal for Alabama and the Crimson Tide.
By the way, as we're doing this show live on this Friday morning, you just heard from David Pollack there. His ESPN College Game Day colleague, Desmond Howard, just tweets a moment ago that Howard believes, and by the way, Game Day will be in Tuscaloosa this weekend, already there on the scene, I'm guessing. Howard believes that Saban will be on the sidelines on Saturday. That's Desmond Howard, the ESPN College Game Day analyst, there just a moment ago. So as I said, this is still very much a story worth following. But let me stay on the train of thought that I was on here, and we'll do more of this later on in the program. We'll welcome on former Alabama great Mike Johnson to help clear up some of what Desmond Howard tweets right there. So David Pollack says that Nick Saban's absence from this game, if that's the way this all goes, is huge for Alabama and injuring their chances of winning this game. I'm not quite so sure I'm with Pollack on that as it being quite as big of a deal as David Pollack describes that. Yes, there are lots of in-game decisions that the head coach makes. Saban himself a moment ago addressed some of those that he said he didn't want to have to see his assistants have to make during a game. But on a one-game basis, and really that's all UGA fans care about right now, what happens on Saturday between the Dogs and the Tide, on a one-game basis, I'm actually not so sure the end result for Alabama is all that much different with or without Stadium, or I should say with or without Saban. I'll give you a little bit of evidence that kind of backs this up. We talked to Barrett Jones, former Alabama great, here this week. It's going to be a part of some of our DawgNation pregame coverage on the DawgNation video channels on Saturday, and you'll hear some of this on the DawgNation website a little bit later on today. But one of the things that Jones said in terms of what Saban's involvement is now, as Saban has kind of progressed through his career, at least on one side of the ball, he may be less involved than he's ever been before. I think Barrett Jones' words here, a guy that played with Saban, knows him well, I think are pretty important to understand just how involved or maybe not involved the regular game day process Nick Saban is at this point. Listen to Barrett Jones and see if you agree.
Coach Saban, obviously, he's a defensive guy, so I think he's a lot more involved defensively than he is offensively. I think there are rare occasions where going forward on fourth down, whether to kick a field goal or punt or things of that nature that he's involved. I wouldn't surprise you if he occasionally gets on there and tells the offensive coordinator to run the ball more, knowing him. I think generally in offense, especially lately with how offense has changed, I think he leads the offense up to the coordinators. I think he does put more input in on defense. He doesn't call the plays on defense necessarily, but I think he has a lot more input with the different kind of coverages and how to handle different situations defensively.
Let me be very blunt here just for a moment. I don't think David Pollack is doing this, but I think other people might try to use Pollack's words as a way of building all this up. There's this attempted narrative that's trying to be formed here of, well, if Georgia faces Alabama without Nick Saban, and if there's no huge crowd there at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and if this Alabama team seems like a little bit different version of the Saban teams that have been great over the course of the last few years, there's kind of a Bama fan imagination of this of, well, if you ain't going to beat them now, when is you going to do it? I mean, that's kind of the way that Alabama fans are trying to sort of set all of this up coming up on Saturday. And that's not a rhetorical question. I mean, there's a chance that Georgia still doesn't win on Saturday, even with all of the Nick Saban stuff that's been going on. And the when is you going to beat them type question, well, the answer to that may still be December. I mean, this is not one of those deals where the ultimate legacy of Kirby Smart is going to be decided one way or another. Even if Nick Saban's not there, the players that he's recruited are still on the field, and the processes that he's put in place will still be put to the test against those same processes that have been put to the place by Kirby Smart. I honestly don't believe on a one-game basis Saban's presence, either there or not, impacts the game all that much. I do think the drama of where Saban is and how involved he's allowed to be is worth paying attention to for reasons that I've been cataloging. But the notion of somehow Alabama becomes the ultimate underdog if Saban is at home and not able to be a part of this game, I think that's completely overblown, but it's obviously a storyline we will continue to monitor. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. It's so glad to have you with us today. I am so glad to have you, and it's fun to be doing this here today. And by the way, busy show for us guest-wise. As I said before, it is former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson going to be with us before we're done today. All of the drama from Tuscaloosa. We will hear from a guy that played with Coach Saban, for Coach Saban. He'll kind of help us separate fact from fiction when it comes to all of that. We'll do that coming up in a couple of minutes. It's Jeff Sintel on the road with him in just a moment, assisted by AAA. Before that, let me do more on kind of the fun storylines around UGA as we go around the doghouse, delivered by Marco's Pizza. Actually, before that, let me give a huge shout-out to our friends at Kroger here. I want to make sure I let you know about what's going on with Kroger. Of course, there is still time for you to get involved with our DawgNation Ultimate Fan Contest. It's presented by our friends at Kroger. When you go to the website, DawgNation.com, you can find out all the information. Obviously, DawgNation known for some of the greatest fans in all of sports, and you may be the ultimate fan. And if you are, well, you want to show that off by going to DawgNation.com, finding out how you can submit your entry. Someone's going to win a $500 gift card courtesy of Kroger as we head towards the holiday season. That's obviously a really good thing to be a part of. Also, we're going to give away a lot of these DawgNation Kroger-branded masks celebrating the great moments of recent DawgNation history. A whole bunch of folks, I think it's up to 50 people that are going to be selected to win one of those Kroger DawgNation branded masks. I've been showing those to you. Those are really fun. I think it's really cool stuff all the way around. Let me see if I can pull one of these out. Yeah, look at that. I actually have mine that I've been wearing here today. Can we come close for a second? Is that possible technologically wise? It may not be. There you go. Look at that. There's the DawgNation Kroger branded mask. This kind of looks back at the great Rose Bowl win. Huge thanks for our buddy Connor Riley on the fly, kind of pulling that out there. So we got 50 people that are going to win one of these. Now, this one's wadded up because it's been in my pocket, but yours will be nice and crisp and clean. A really good way to kind of go back and relive some of the great moments in Dog Nation. If you're listening radio podcast, the mask itself kind of looks like a Dog Nation story, right? One you would see at DawgNation.com. This is a very, very bold reminder to folks of who you're a fan of and the fact that you may be one of Dog Nation's ultimate fans as well. So make sure you check that out online at DawgNation.com. All right, with that said, now let's go around the doghouse, delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And one of the great storylines for the game on Saturday is the presence of Stetson Bennett once again as a Georgia starting quarterback on the road as a starter for the very first time. And, you know, I think that we get used to these stories, but it's still amazing to think about how much Stetson Bennett traveled, how many miles he had to travel to be the starting quarterback in a game like this on Saturday. And as we've said, listen, the guy on the other side himself is a little bit of a didn't expect to be here type quarterback in Mac Jones. But Mark Schlabach from ESPN.com had a great profile of Bennett this week. And one of the things that he highlighted is, remember, Bennett was a guy, kind of growing up in Blackshear, Georgia, didn't have all the big offers, had played well as a high school guy, had done well at some camps. But let's face it, we're all obsessed with like tall guys, the big guys, and that's just not quite what Bennett brings to the table. But apparently a current Georgia Bulldog was quite instrumental in seeing Stetson Bennett arrive at Georgia initially as a preferred walk-on, and then the rest is kind of history. Let me show you this quote from Stetson Bennett III. That's Stetson Bennett IV, the current Georgia quarterback's father. This is from Mark Schlabach, ESPN.com. And this is a quote from Richard LeCount, who apparently went to Kirby Smart. Remember how instrumental LeCount was as a recruiter for Georgia back then? It's the always we ain't done yet type stuff that LeCount was always doing. Well, this is also some recruiting work that LeCount did back then. As told by Stetson Bennett III, Davis Mills, that was the quarterback that eventually landed at Stanford, had been at GAC, might be the best quarterback in the country, LeCount told Smart, according to Stetson Bennett's father, but he's only second best in Class AAA. Richard LeCount, as legend has it, says, I've played against both, and Stetson Bennett is better. And that's not to discount Davis Mills, who is a very good quarterback, and certainly hopefully the Pac-12 gets a chance to play again at some point. But it's really cool to hear a great story of how Richard LeCount, who was quite a leader for that class of 2017, also leading the way and getting Stetson Bennett to the University of Georgia initially as a preferred walk-on, and now maybe the rest could truly be history as Stetson Bennett tries to write his own version of history with a big win at Alabama coming up on Saturday. That is really fun to think about. Something else that's fun to think about is our friends at Marco's Pizza. It's America's most beloved pizza. It's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. Also, great savings for you as you head towards the weekend. Think about watching a bunch of sports this weekend, baseball tonight, football all the weekend. How about this to accompany that sports? A large one-topping pizza, 10 chicken wings or dippers, just $17.99 right now. Go to the Marco's app or marcos.com. You can find out a whole lot more about that. We are fully loaded today. Nick Saban drama of what may or may not still happen with him, how much his potential absence means. We're all over that story over the course of the rest of our program. Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American, to discuss that and more later on. But for now, big recruiting news this week. Let's relive that a little bit as we go on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jeff Sintel here on the road, assisted by AAA. And, Jeff, I want to spend most of our time talking about Marius Mims because you were there with him in Cochran, Georgia on Saturday, and what a moment that was for both for Mims and his family and Georgia's 2021 class. But if you don't mind, let's piggyback off of just a little bit what we were saying before. First of all, it's really fond memories for me just to even think about how much of a great recruiter Richard LeCount was in 2017. Hard to believe that he's a senior now and playing, in his last string of games here for Georgia, just given how pivotal he was to that first, what I would call great class for Kirby Smart in the Kirby Smart era, and the now legendary tale of him kind of vouching for Stetson Bennett, as Mark Schlabach told at ESPN.com this week. I think that's all just really fun and cool stuff, and kind of a good way to think about just how unlikely the path, and I know you've written about this at DawgNation.com yourself, how unlikely the path that Stetson Bennett has traveled has been. I think it's fueled Bennett. I think it's made him a better player. Obviously, he's got some real tough work to do on Saturday and over the course of the rest of this season, but it has certainly been an enjoyable ride thus far, has it not?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It certainly has. I mean, you bring those things up, and, it's funny to see the national writer speak up and, lend a national voice to this. But, I mean, man, that's the Stetson Bennett I've known since, I guess, 2016 down in Pierce County in Blackshear. I can remember him singing at the Rising Seniors games. I mean, those are things that were a very big thing in the state of Georgia. And it was funny because, I think there was a press conference a couple weeks back when Kirby Smart was asked about Richard kind of stumping for Stetson Bennett with Kirby Smart. And I can remember those stories vividly, how Richie's like, this guy needs to be on this team. Richie had went against them a couple of times, and Stetson had lit his team up. We published some quotes there about Stetson Bennett as well. And for folks that want to know, I mean, I hold both of these young men in great esteem. They're great quarterbacks. They're special quarterbacks with the football. But, Jake Fromm and Stetson Bennett came in the same recruiting class. And I think maybe the differences are, I think Stetson's ability is the clear difference. His mobility, his legs, speed, his ability to kind of do a little Johnny Manziel thing out there on the field. But there's never been any issue with Stetson's arm, at least compared to Jake. Those were similar arms in terms of RPMs. I think maybe Jake had a lot more touch and accuracy and, a little bit better ability to layer the ball. But Stetson was always the gunslinger. That's a familiar term when you see narratives that are crafted about young Stetson. He was always the guy that was going to stick it in there. Toughness, resiliency, it just drips in down south Georgia boy. And remember, he is actually older than Jake Fromm and still the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia.
So shifting gears here to the Marius Mims recruitment from Wednesday, a great battle won by Georgia for its class of 2021. I was really proud to be able to bring coverage of this on the DawgNation video channels, but you were there on the scene in Cochran when this all goes down. And I'm always interested. I don't get a chance to be in many of these rooms when the recruit makes the decision, but the mood in the room is always a part of the story. And I know we're still in kind of a weird coronavirus type vibe, but this felt more normal than not, at least through the magic of video. What was your kind of behind the scenes look at being there? What did it feel like to be with Mims and his family and his friends and colleagues and coaches and everything else in Bleckley County when he announced his pledge to the Dogs this week?
Well, it's funny. You've been to so many of these now, and things kind of slow down for you a little bit. You're able to scan the auditorium, and it's like things that you knew. I mean, to me, it had always kind of felt like Marius was trending towards Georgia. And it was kind of like, look around the room, Brandon, and you see like, okay, those are family members popping up. It looks like they're wearing red. There's red T-shirts on. There's Georgia stuff on. I don't think they're trying to hide much subtlety about what's going on, rather than, I guess you could always say they're going to show up and represent their choice or their prediction. But this is a very much Bleckley County, Cochran, Georgia is very much a pro-Georgia, pro-University of Georgia type environment. I think Connor and I, we walked out of the barbecue joint where we ate lunch at, and we saw a Georgia golf cart that was branded to the T outside of the local barbecue spot where we had lunch. And I looked at Connor and I said, well, I guess that's a good sign that that's a Georgia G. We'd kind of worried about foreshadowing if that was an orange painted regalia, UT golf cart out there. But, Marius has always felt that sort of way about Georgia. He's told me before, he even told me on the record that he would have been committed to Georgia by now. Sam Pittman was the guy. To me, Brandon, I remember seeing him last year. I think it's the Texas A&M game. He was there. A lot of other recruits were there as well, but he just looked like to me that it was almost cemented that he was going to be a Bulldog. The way he acted, the way he interacted, I can compare those. It's not a polygraph, Brandon. It's not a crystal ball, but I can just compare that look. Same look I saw in Trey Hill's face, same look I saw in D'Angelo Gibbs' face, same look I saw in the Torrey Johnson's and Jamari Salyer's face. It's one of the things you just can't hide when a young man's in Sanford Stadium.
I think that's really interesting. I actually want to talk to you more about that part of this in a moment, because there are a couple of interesting things you've said about that topic over the course of the last couple of days. Before that, though, let me remind you that we are on the road today with Jeff Sintel, assisted by AAA, fresh off Jeff's trip to Cochran, Georgia for the Marius Mims decision. And here's something else I want you to think about when you think about AAA. Life insurance is something that's very important for anyone who is responsible for taking care of somebody else. I can say, as the dad of two young kids, that when my wife and I, we first started thinking about starting our family, life insurance was big on our mind for that. And when life insurance is on your mind, I want AAA to be on your mind as well, and find out all the ways they can serve you from a life insurance perspective. Let me give you a few different ways you can get in touch to find out more about this. Really 3 different ways. You can give them a call, 866-695-0222. That number once again, 866-695-0222. You can also visit a local AAA office and just talk to somebody directly, one of their insurance agents right there in front of you, and you can have that face-to-face conversation about a topic that's as important as this, or you can go online, AAA.com/life for more information. That's AAA.com/life. And of course, it's great to have AAA as we're on the road, assisted by them here today with Jeff Sintel. And, Jeff, on the Mims topic, the one thing that you have cautioned us on a little bit, as much as you say that you've, kind of felt like that things were trending in Georgia's direction, that you believe, and at least you've said in the past, that this is still going to be an ongoing recruitment even beyond the announcement that was made on Wednesday. And Mims himself kind of gave some voice to that a little bit too. Would you mind expounding on that part of this, of just how much is now done regarding Mims now that he's publicly announced Georgia?
Yeah, it's funny. So the theatrics of it, the drama of it, was he left that door open for, he still might take a visit to Tennessee. He still, it was really, some really close people around the program told me, and around Marius told me that, dude, this was closer than I guess a lot of people thought. Probably 55, 45, 52, 48, with Georgia carrying the majority, and I guess we'll call it the Electoral College in his brain for his decision to choose the University of Georgia. But, he kind of left that hint there, which is to me a 18-year-old kid saying, I still kind of like, being the recruited All-American that everybody's asking about. I'm sure he still appreciates all of DawgNation on Twitter when they basically would send him 97 notifications if he ate a ham and cheese sandwich at lunch on across his social media. I think this feels done, Brandon. I talked to some family members, and they said that this decision they've been thinking about for a while. Maybe there's some finality that came to it on the day before his decision. But a lot of them, he just kept saying one thing over and over, Brandon. He said, I just realized that Georgia was the place where I needed to be. And that might be hometown kid going to the big state school. It might be performing and training under Matt Luke. It might be playing with his buddy Brock Vandegrift, who, Brock Vandegrift quietly had some pretty good feeling about which way Marius Mims was leaning. And you guys saw on the DawgNation webpage yesterday, I wrote a story that basically combined, I think, 12 out of the 16 public commitments and their thoughts on Mims and how glad they were to have him and what they were thinking down the line. A lot of folks thought that they were going to get Mims, but when he said something like Georgia was where I needed to be, it felt like I needed to be. That says a lot. Even though he's going to take his decision, he'll sign during December, he'll enroll in January. I just think Mount Mims, as I kind of call him a lot, huge young man, huge prospect, but he certainly seems tailor-made for the G. So
that collage of faces that involves him and Corey Foreman and Mason Smith, we all remember that from a few weeks ago, and I know this is something you've also been asked really a whole bunch since the Mims decision became somewhat official on Wednesday. How influential do you think that this 5-star is with some of those other 5 stars that I just mentioned? Is this really the continuation of more recruiting momentum for Georgia? Does this make it easier to win with a Smith or a Foreman, guys like that, now that Mims has gone public with his desire to be at UGA?
I kind of felt that most of those young men kind of knew what he and Brock were all about. But this put some finality to it. I guess the way I would say this, Brandon, to answer your question as best I can, is the raging momentum that's happening now in Georgia's recruiting. Look how, especially, let's just go straight to A-gap here on this. Everybody wants to know what Marius Mims could potentially mean for Brock, for Corey Foreman and also Mason Smith, and all this raging momentum for Georgia. If Marius would have chose Tennessee, that would have been a firewall, I guess, or a fire break in terms of all this momentum. That didn't happen. The thing that I remember all those young men saying, there's the story that was relayed about how Corey Foreman looked at all in the eye at dinner and said, this is a very special group. This is a great group of guys. I've never kind of felt this around everyone like this before. that's positive momentum. It continues to be positive momentum, especially when you see how Georgia creating havoc, which is what Foreman and Mason Smith wanted to see. Georgia playing great defense, Georgia winning big ball games. And then you got an LSU who is seen as the most that's just the team Georgia's going to have to duke it out with, I believe, to get both Mason Smith and Corey Foreman. And you see LSU, especially defensively, not being up to par, not being the unit that everybody knows them to be, not looking like DBU, not looking like a place where you currently see 12 NFL draft picks or 12 NFL prospects on defense. I think all these things are happening in Georgia's favor. A win on Saturday would continue that momentum. It would say that Georgia's arrived, Georgia's there. And I think that would just continue things on, especially with Mason Smith and Corey Foreman going forward.
Well, Jeff, we certainly appreciate you being here on the road today, assisted by AAA. Your coverage of the Mims announcement was great, and the subsequent stories at DawgNation.com have helped us better understand that story as well. I know you'll be all over Georgia-Bama over the course of the weekend, both a look ahead on that game, then a look back at the freshmen who get involved. So thanks for being here on our program today, on the road, assisted by AAA, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Brendan, I got this text from two different people today. They said if Bryce Wilson can do it against the Los Angeles Dodgers, Stetson Bennett can do it for the Georgia Bulldogs. That's just something people are sunshine pumping today heading into Tuscaloosa. You
know what, Jeff? That is a great way to close out that conversation, and I think you're absolutely right on both counts.
Have a good one, man. Drive safe.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So how about Jeff with a great Braves take on the way out the door there? Yeah, fun. You know, this really takes me back. I mean, I've always loved this time of year. October is the best sporting month. You know, obviously on this show, we talk exclusively about college football, exclusively, for the most part, about the Georgia Bulldogs and the SEC. But I've always been a big Braves fan, been a big baseball fan. And I love nothing more than the way that, you know, you do baseball in the week leading up to the weekend with the college football stuff. And I just love it. I mean, we've been battening down the hatches for these games, you know, every night. My family into the games, you know, good chance to hang out with some friends and watch the games. It's been great. And to think the Braves are one game away from the World Series. By the way, we got some fun stuff coming up next week away from the DawgNation channels. If the Braves, you know, do keep this run going, I'll just drop a little hint on that. I'm not supposed to say much more, I don't think. But either way, it's really fun. And it was great last night. Bryce Wilson, a great job taking down the L.A. Dodgers once again. Clayton Kershaw. That was fun all the way around. We're a few minutes away here from our buddy Mike Johnson. We'll talk more Georgia-Bama with him. Let me also remind you about my friends at Classic City Lager. It's a Creature Comforts Brewing Company feature, and it is an Athens original. And you're watching baseball tonight. You're watching football this weekend. I tell you, it pairs well with all of it. And the good thing is, you know, when I drink Classic City Lager, it makes me think about Athens, but you don't have to be in Athens to pick it up. Whatever retailer you go to, it's available year-round, 6, 12-pack cans. It's a lager-style beer, which means it's an easy drinking beer, but there's no sacrifice for flavor. This is still a crisp, great-tasting beer. In fact, it's good cold beer. It's just as simple as that. You can find out more about it checking out the hashtag #GoodColdBeer. Enjoy yourself some Classic City Lager here this weekend. All right, let me preview a couple of these SEC games for the upcoming weekend. I'll be very candid here for a moment. One of the criticisms that probably sticks to me is I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. I'll own that. That's probably true. This weekend, though, I don't mind telling you, I'm more in doubt about some of the games for this weekend than I typically might be. And it's also worth pointing out, even in the aftermath of the postponement of LSU and Florida, obviously Vanderbilt, Missouri, which really no one cares about anyway, the weirdness involving Nick Saban, there's still a pretty interesting crop of games here this weekend, and I am not all that certain how some of these games are going to go down, but I think the storylines around them are actually pretty fascinating. Let's start with Auburn going to South Carolina as a small favorite. They've been about a field goal favorite all week long here in this. Auburn is a team that I tried to say a lot during the offseason was better than they were being given credit for. Well, that has not been true very much the first 3 games. They got blown out by Georgia, which Dog fans are obviously happy about, and they really should have lost last week to Arkansas. And the fact that they should have lost to Arkansas was an eye-opening thing for me because the Auburn program ought to have massive advantages over the Arkansas program because Auburn's recruited far better. They've got some stability in place. Arkansas is doing all of this brand new. And as much as I love the hires that Sam Pittman has made there, the talent advantage that Auburn had last week should have been enough for a coasting easy victory. And it took some bad calls from the officials to even preserve an Auburn win on Saturday. So this is kind of a back-against-the-wall performance for Auburn this week against South Carolina. I do think Auburn's the better team here, even though I've kind of argued for South Carolina also at times being a little undervalued. They obviously blew past Vanderbilt last week. This is still a situation where I think Auburn has to play hard this week to have anything the rest of the year really matter at all. I guess that's kind of what I expect to happen, but kind of a last stand here for Auburn to prove that they are in any way, shape, form involved in the 2020 season. That's what this game's about on Saturday. A little bit the same thing for Tennessee, too. Tennessee hosts Kentucky on Saturday. That's Georgia's opponent next week, by the way, a game that you still got to be very careful about going on the road next Saturday after the big game in Tuscaloosa, and we'll do plenty on that next week. But the point here is that Tennessee through 2 games was probably a little better than I expected them to be. I thought they would lose to South Carolina week 1. They didn't. I thought they might get challenged by Missouri. They weren't. But again, last week they get blown out by Georgia. So which is the real Tennessee? The one that couldn't stay with Georgia at all, or the one that coasted to 8 consecutive wins, including 2 to start this year? The rivalry game against Kentucky, which normally is much later in the year, I think becomes the real measuring stick for all of that. This is a real show-up game for Tennessee to prove that they are an improved program. And if they can't handle their business or can't do it impressively against Tennessee, then more questions are going to come on Jeremy Pruitt on the heels of really getting beaten up pretty bad by Georgia. The games that I feel the strongest about in terms of how they're going to go this season, this weekend, and games that I think are probably worth watching. Arkansas gets a chance to host Ole Miss after everything it's been through over the course of the season thus far. And this is a spot where I think Arkansas is actually pretty dangerous. I've never seen a team like Ole Miss brag on itself so much for losing a game against Alabama. The Rebels have really kind of treated that as if it was a win because they scored a bunch of points against the Crimson Tide, but ultimately it was actually a loss. And anytime a team explodes for a big offensive performance at home and then goes on the road, I think it ends up kind of being a little bit of a dangerous spot. So I've actually got Arkansas winning that game outright on Saturday. And the Texas A&M Mississippi State game I think is also interesting a little bit too. A&M probably turns the corner, but maybe a little bit of a hiccup against Mississippi State, closer than the experts think. We will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Kroger, let's get ready to say hello to my good friend Mike Johnson, the great former Alabama Crimson Tide product and terrific analyst, and a guy that we just haven't talked to in nearly enough time. It's been way too long since he's been back on the program. So, Mike, welcome back. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and I hope that you're doing well. And let me, if you don't mind, putting your business out there on the streets here. Congratulations on a new addition for your family. What a time this is to be in the Johnson household, I guess.
Yeah, man, I definitely appreciate you having me on. It has been a long time, way too long since we had a chance to talk, especially talking some Georgia and Bama football, but I really appreciate it. Not a lot of sleep going on in the Johnson household, but a whole lot of love, that's for sure, man. He's been awesome. He's 8 weeks old now, and I hate to say it, but hopefully he winds up at Alabama down the road.
I understand Saban's already offered him. Is that true?
I tell you what, if he ever sees the size of his hands, he might throw one out there about 16, 17 years in advance. I'll say that.
That's good to know. All right, you and I are good friends. We can speak candidly. I need you to tell me this. Mike, what kind of chicanery are you guys trying to pull this weekend with this Saban stuff? I got Desmond.
I knew it was coming before you even started the question. I knew it was coming.
Desmond Howard's on Twitter this morning saying he thinks that Nick Saban's still on the sideline. I got no problem with him being on the sideline or even in the booth. Mike, what I don't want is I don't want him coaching this game from home. I think that reeks of something about that seems really fishy to me. Saban trying to coach this game from home. I've said before you can't have a cell phone at a blackjack table. I don't want Saban having some sort of telecom hookup with people inside the stadium. What are y'all trying to pull this weekend? Reveal it to the world right now.
Listen, man, I'm actually with you on that. I don't find that to be fair, and maybe that's the fact that I've been coaching high school ball, and we always are trying to find our own way to kind of one up things. And the first thing I thought of was, man, I hope I would hate for somebody else to be doing that, watching one of our high school games at home. So I don't know. And to me, honestly, BA, I don't think it has a ton to do with the outcome of the game. Where Coach Saban coaches from, or if he does or he doesn't. To me, the way things have looked recently. Now, I wasn't this way when I was in school, but to me, the way things have looked recently is that he's definitely had more of a hands-off, kind of passive approach on the sideline. There's been less and less butt chewing, like Lane Kiffin likes to call them, in recent years. So I don't know where he'll be coaching from. I'd love to see him on the sideline. But, to me, and it's crazy to say this day and age, but this is 2020. It's a crazy year. I don't know that Nick Saban being on the sideline changes the game either way. I think the players still have to go out and perform. The game plan will be the same. The adjustments will probably be the same for the most part, and you'll have to see the players go out and play against one another.
In all seriousness, I actually almost 100% agree with you on that. I guess if it was one of those things, and I would certainly hope this never happens, but if his health condition caused him to miss a series of games, by the end of that streak, I could see some erosion where all of a sudden, him kind of keeping everything kind of right and tight, all of a sudden that kind of goes away. But for one game, which is really all of our audience cares about right now, it's going to happen on Saturday against Georgia, kind of holding it together even if Saban's not there. I actually don't expect much of a reduction in performance from Alabama on Saturday, and it sounds like you kind of agree.
I do, and let's be honest, Alabama can't afford more of a reduction, especially on the defensive side of the ball after last weekend. I think the game plan is going to be the same. Coach Saban's going to be watching film, whether it's from home or whether it's from the office. They're going to be game planning the same way with Pete Golding. He's going to allow Steve Sarkisian to do what he wants to do offensively. I think some of the in-game calls, some of the in-game decisions might get changed. Hey, do we go for it on fourth and short here? When do we kick field goals? But for the most part, look, Sark's been a head coach. I'm sure, that if it comes down to that, Nick Saban will be in his ear as far as those situations go in the game, what he would like to see him do, what he thinks he should do, and he'll be as prepared as possible. But I don't know that it changes a whole lot in terms of what really happens during the game. Obviously Nick Saban's one of the greatest to ever do it, but this game's going to be about a lot more than just those minor adjustments.
So you mentioned the Alabama defense. Obviously, statistically, that's not been what we've come to expect from that unit. Last week against Ole Miss, Mike, I don't know that Georgia fans take a ton from that game because I think most Georgia fans would say that the UGA style, even with Todd Monken as offensive coordinator, is still a good bit different than Lane Kiffin. Kiffin just wants to play a lot faster than Georgia probably wants to. But I think Georgia fans do have a hope that maybe some of those Alabama defensive weaknesses can be exploited a little bit. What do you make of why the Tide has had so much trouble on that side of the ball thus far this year?
Oh, there's a lot of questions. I think first and foremost, some of the players you've expected to step up in the positions that Alabama has been great at. Alabama's been great at safety. Alabama's been great at middle linebacker. And for the most part, last weekend, Dylan Moses has just not played up to par. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury or if he has just not come along the way they thought he would after his injury a year ago. And Daniel Wright, the safety, has just not played the way that Alabama is used to seeing those guys play at those particular positions. So I know a lot of Alabama fans have hit the panic button after last week. Listen, myself included. I never thought in a million years that I would see an Alabama defense exposed like that. But I think there is some solace for some Alabama fans that you do look at a different system, that maybe Georgia's a little bit more old school in terms of the way they approach the offensive side of the football. And there's no secret to what Alabama's going to do. Alabama's going to try to man up on Georgia's wide receivers. They're going to try to play, an 8-man box, and they're going to challenge Georgia to run the ball right at them. And it's like Nick Saban always talks about. They're going to try to force Georgia's offense to be left-handed. They're going to say, hey, Stetson Bennett, please go out and win this game. If you can win this game, great. But we're not going to let you run the ball down our throat, control, the clock, and do all those things like Georgia football likes to do. So I think it's an interesting matchup, and I think you're going to put a lot of pressure on kind of that secondary shell from Alabama's defense and kind of see what you can do up front.
Let me squeeze in a couple other things before we let you go real quick. You mentioned Stetson Bennett. That's obviously not the quarterback that many Georgia fans would be expecting to start in a game like this, and yet Bennett's played really well over the course of the last couple of weeks. On the other side, Mac Jones has a little bit of that too. He was the second quarterback in the class that brought Tua Tagovailoa. He's less heralded as a recruit than Bryce Young is. Has that talk quieted down in Alabama? Do Bama fans now see Mac Jones as the guy? Is he the unquestioned starter, or is there still a little bit of, hey, when's Bryce Young going to be on the football field and playing more? Obviously Jones' stats speak for themselves. Has he fully won over the Alabama fans?
I don't think there's any doubt. When you look at his offensive performance, listen, we can talk about the defense against Ole Miss all we want to, but if Alabama's offense even hiccups a little bit against Ole Miss, Alabama probably doesn't win that football game. And I think for the most part, everybody over in Tuscaloosa in the state of Alabama and all the Alabama fans in general have really bought into what Mac Jones did. And to be honest with you, B.A., you know me, the way I look at football, I was almost excited. Now, I don't want to say excited. I was almost looking forward to a Tua Tagovailoa, a post-Tua Tagovailoa era, because you look at Tua Tagovailoa on the field and you say, okay, we're going to let Tua win the game. That's not so much what you look at for Mac Jones. You say, okay, let's run Najee Harris now behind this really good offensive line, and then Mac Jones can kind of complement that. And he has been a perfect complement. He's really good at throwing the deep ball. He's really good at making those decisions. You can tell he's an upperclassman and not one of these freshmen that have been rushed into action. He's a smart playmaker, and he's done all the things that have been asked of him. And for me and most of the people I talk to associated with it, everybody feels really good about what Mac Jones has done.
All right, before we let you go, I always like your objective analysis on Georgia. It's just kind of good to get the perspective of someone on the outside looking in here. UGA fans are obviously thrilled by the defense, but there's probably a little bit of skepticism, and probably some from me too, on in 2020 whether a team led more by defense than offense can actually compete and win a national championship. As they get ready to play your alma mater on Saturday, how good do you think Georgia is right now?
I think they're a really good football team. I think I still want to see some things from them. You mentioned it offensively. And listen, this is the exact same thing. We've talked about it before. When you look at the teams I played on back in 2008, 2009, we were very run-heavy. We were defensive dominant. We played into the hands of our defense because we knew they were really good. But at the end of the year, Greg McElroy had to make plays in the SEC championship game against Auburn. I think that there's still a little bit of that question mark out there. But I tell you what really raises my eyebrows about this Georgia football team, BA, is they play tough. And I think there's just something to be said for a personality of the football team that takes on the personality of their head coach. They're a tough group of guys. They're nitty-gritty. They're going to get down in the trenches. They're going to do what's necessary to run the ball and stop the run. And when you have a tough football team, more times than not, they will find a way to win the game. And I think Stetson Bennett just kind of fits into that blue-collar category of a guy that's going to make the right decisions and going to make the tough plays. So I'm excited to see, the brand of football they're going to bring. I'm sad that, there's not going to be a packed crowd in Tuscaloosa. Yeah. It's been, 13 years since Georgia's come to Tuscaloosa. I was there last time I was a sophomore. But I think it's going to be a fun game either way, and I'm excited to see two brands of football kind of go at it.
Well, Mike, you've always been a great broadcaster and analyst. You're a great coach now, working with the next generation of football players. Thanks for spending some – I know it's busy for you right now, so thanks for spending some time with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and I really hope we get a chance to catch up again very soon.
It's few and far between these days, BA, but I always enjoy it, brother.
Great stuff. Yeah, man, I love having Mike Johnson on the show. He's just really good at what he does, and it's cool that we got a chance to catch up with him before the big Georgia-Alabama game on Saturday. Let me also give a shout-out to my friends at MyBookie here as well. It's winning season at MyBookie. That means your chance to take advantage of big first deposit bonuses. You can get up to $1,000. You can get your first deposit doubled, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. One word, DAWG. Put MyBookie in your browser, then use the promo code DawgNation. As I said, all those great deposit bonuses like getting it doubled, getting up to $1,000. You're essentially a winner before the betting even starts. But then after that, you simply play, win, and get paid. Winning season at MyBookie. Make sure you take advantage of that by using the promo code DawgNation. Hope all of you get ready to enjoy Georgia and Bama on Saturday. We are loaded with coverage. I will be in Tuscaloosa tomorrow for our Kroger kickoff. Then after the game for our DawgNation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore. Also, Gator Hater Updater. Let's give that to you as we say goodbye to you for the weekend. How about 1,448 days? We'll see you Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down after what was a loaded edition of our program today. We're going to have to be quick with the comments a little bit because we've got 11 things to do before we rock and roll out the door here on this Friday. So we're going to try to get as many as we can. I'll try to be less long-winded and give you a chance to have more comments addressed on the program because I know a lot of you have got a lot you want to say heading into the weekend. So let me go YouTube first, and we'll knock that out, and then we'll just kind of see how everything else is going. Getting ready for a fun weekend. Looking forward to being in Tuscaloosa, as Mike said. You wish it was 100,000 people, even if it makes Georgia a tougher environment to win, and it's still what the SEC is supposed to feel like. But I think there's big game vibes around this. I think the home gating is catching on. What people are doing around their houses, neighborhoods, things like that. People are still loving college football, and I'm a big believer that the SEC is still mostly getting this right. I know there's some negative headlines this week with the postponements and the Saban stuff, but, the SEC, in attempting to play a 10-game conference-only schedule, still puts it well ahead of what two of the other Power 5 leagues are even in their most ambitious dreams trying to do. So the SEC's got a little bit of a cushion here. I really feel like that there'll be plenty of people ready to call this a failure, but they're going to call it a failure no matter what. You really can't worry about that. At one point in time, I worried about the influence of outside voices when I thought it might contribute to the season being canceled, but those people lost. They lost resoundingly. And as it stands right now, this is working. It's not perfect. It's not always pretty, but it's working. And that's all I need to know about that. Frank Patterson says, Bama will try to play man and load the box and make Bennett beat them. And he will. Pickens and KJ one-on-one is not a good move. Long plays after the catch this week. Yeah, I mean, I would expect that you see a lot of man coverage. And that was the thing a year ago that Georgia had a hard time beating, that press man coverage, which is kind of famous in the SEC because defenses want to be as aggressive as they possibly can be. For the most part, Georgia just couldn't really beat that a year ago. And this is a game in which you can show the improvement in that area. Obviously, I think that Bennett's not afraid to put it in a tight window. And does he throw the ball 150 miles an hour and everything like that? I think he's probably fine. I don't know that he's going to dominate the NFL combine with his arm strength, but I also don't think a fly is going to land on the ball midair. I think he's fine. I think he crosses the threshold of being good enough and in all those regards. And it is about going out and winning the one-on-one battles and, having the guts to put the ball where it needs to go to give a guy a chance to catch it. I think that's all really true. I think it is. Wyatt Fielden says a great special from Connor Riley this morning. He says it was really good, so I'll have to check that out. I have not seen that yet. I've been rushing to get ready, but I'll have to make sure I check that out. Scott Harris says, any chance that Scott Cochran has a special teams trick up his sleeve? I think that Cochran will try to put a stamp on this game somehow, some way, and it'd be appropriate if he did. And I do think when it comes to special teams like that, goodness knows I'm not talking about faking a punt again, but anything that Alabama might not be fully prepared for if Nick Saban truly isn't there, then that may be one way where you can get kind of a tiny slight advantage. I think that's probably true. Huck Finn says, what good reason does UGA have to believe it can beat Alabama? Well, I would say that having the best defense in the country in comparison to Alabama giving up 30 points per game thus far is at least something. Now, it's not enough to warrant victory alone, but it's at least something. I mean, given the choice of being on one of the side or the other, in that particular regard, you'd choose to be on the Georgia side of things. GB2 just says, does Bennett have more than 50 rushing yards? It is something that he brings to the table for sure. Coleman Matthews says, does Pickens keep his cool during the game? I'm guessing he probably does. I'm guessing Alabama tries to both literally and figuratively draw him off sides a little bit. But here's the one thing I'll always say about Pickens in big games like this. The movie, I've always loved this movie. Some of y'all may have not have seen it. A lot of you may not have. 25th Hour, the movie. There's a line in that movie where the bouncer at the nightclub tells a guy who's about to go to prison. It's the Ed Norton character. He says, don't lose your cool until it's time to lose your cool. I do think in a big game environment, there is a time to lose your cool. So keeping your cool, keeping your composure is always really important. But I would humbly suggest, and obviously I don't have any personal experience to speak this on, but I would humbly suggest that more big games are lost by players who can't meet the moment when it's time to lose your cool, when it's time to go all out, when it's time to really get into a street fight, figuratively speaking here. I think more big games are lost by people who can't meet the moment than are lost by guys who run in the red just a little too much and can't keep their composure. I think it's hard to match the intensity required for a big game. I just think it is. One of the reasons why Alabama's been as good as long as it is, they've played in a lot of these kinds of games. Therefore, their players are somewhat immune to the anxiety of games like this. And Georgia's kind of coming along in that regard, too. Now, Georgia's played in a lot of big games. But the feeling in a game like this, I mean, as someone who has stood on sidelines before in big games like this, I can tell you, now it's not going to happen on Saturday, but the ground shakes. I mean, it just, when the crowd is roaring I said, you don't have that on Saturday necessarily, but it's just a piece of evidence that you point to that these games do feel different. No matter how much you try to prepare for them normally, the game itself actually feels different, and you do have to raise your level to match what's happening on the other side. Guys don't, I think, go into a game planning on trying harder, but there's just a momentum that takes over in a situation like this. So George Pickens, does he need to go back to the commenter, keep his cool and keep his composure? Of course he does. But there's a little bit of that willingness to get into the fray that is required to win a big game, and I hope that whatever Pickens has in that regard is contagious for a lot of other Georgia players on Saturday. I'll criticize Pickens for squirting the water bottle. I don't like great players to be silly. I think silliness is an unnecessary distraction, but tenacity, a little bit of edge, that's what I want my team to have, and I love that Pickens has got that in a game like this. Wesley Gary says, if Georgia loses the game, does it mean that offenses mean more than defenses, considering we had the number one defense last year and lost to LSU? Wesley, I am definitely on guard about the idea that great defense plays great offense and great offense just finds a way to emerge. I'm not waving the white flag before the game begins, but I have clearly noticed very good Georgia defenses last year, maybe even a great Georgia defense, that in meeting up with a great offense, it just had a hard time matching what the LSU offense was doing. The Alabama offense on Saturday could be much the same way. I think a great performance in a game like this is still points being allowed. I mean, if Georgia wins 31-28, that seems like a lot of points by what Georgia typically gives up, but 31-28, there's a way of looking at that. That's a great performance. I mean, think about it this way. One of the stats that I think is relatively easy to explain, and I think really matters in college football, is what is known as success rate. What success rate is simply the yards you gain compared to the yards you need. In college football, commonly 5 yards on first down is considered a successful play. If you only get 3 yards on first down, either throwing or running, that's not a success. It takes 5 yards to be kind of on schedule for moving the chains. That's what a successful play is. On second down, they typically say, hey, do you get 70% of the yards that you need? And on third and fourth down, do you convert either for a first down or a touchdown? And if you look at each play as either a success or not, you can develop a success rate, the percentage of plays that you did what needed to be due to be successful. Well, guess what? You can have a very high success rate defensively, but you can still occasionally give up the explosive play, and that puts points on the board for the other side. I just don't think that you can expect any defense in modern times to be perfect. First of all, the rules favor the offenses. I was looking at a stat this morning of all of the RPO yards that exist in college football now, in the SEC in particular. Georgia's not quite getting as many RPOs as some other teams are, and RPO in this case like the pop pass, right? This is not the run-pass option, not a quarterback run. It's the opportunity to either hand the ball to the running back, pull it out, pop it over the top of the line of scrimmage to a receiver. And one of the things that makes RPO so much easier now is the fact that the college football referees don't enforce the rule. They let the offensive line's only supposed to go 4 yards down the field on a passing play. If they get farther down the field than that, it's supposed to be a penalty. But watch a lot of these RPO plays in college football where the offensive linemen are allowed to get away in a lot of cases with going much, much longer than 4 yards down the field. It ought to be a penalty. And if you wanted to rein in some of the offensive stuff, that'd be an easy way to do it. But for the most part, officials just don't call that. And so when you look for reasons why the offense is ahead of the defense, and typically speaking, offense kind of beats out defense in a matchup of good teams, the rules and the way they're enforced is a big part of that. Dennis Wilson says he can smell the Stetson cologne on me. At some point in time, I may get one of those Stetson hats and bring it in here. The problem is I have a gigantic head, as many of you are probably aware of. It'd take a pretty big Stetson to cover my dome. Fishing with Tiny Basson says, does Saban not being there make the loss against his assistants go away if they lose? This to me is like there's no official record book anywhere that says this. This is all just conjecture. So on Monday, we will treat this as Nick Saban having lost to his assistant. I saw a message board quote about this. I can't confirm this, but this was pretty perfect about something along the lines of George Patton beating Rommel, but Rommel wasn't there. Like I'm not even smart enough to even know if it was really even true or not. But the point is that I'm going to treat it as if Nick Saban lost, and I guess Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports reports that it will be an official loss on Nick Saban's record. All of this is conjecture. Alabama fans are going to try to spin it one way. They'll try to spin an Alabama win another way. But, Georgia fans are left to define this for themselves, for the good and for the bad. So, yeah, if Georgia wins, we will treat this as Saban being toppled by Kirby Smart. Michael Porter says, good luck with the Stetson. Let me go to Facebook. I haven't been over there yet, and after that, we've got to get ready. Hold on, y'all. Here we come. All right, over here on Facebook for a moment, by the way, as I'm transitioning, let me remind you to check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for all your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, and electric needs. They'll take good care of you, story after story. They've been delivering smiles. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Chase Smith says, can't believe nobody talking about the Alabama not having a quarterback that can beat Georgia with its legs. That's a major difference and advantage for the Dogs in this game. Interesting take from Chase Smith there. John Rhodes says, we're going to learn a lot about Stetson Bennett tomorrow. He takes care of business, then I won't second guess anymore and be all in. Yeah, John, I think that's well said. And I've tried to be really honest about this. I mean, obviously, I expected someone other than Stetson to be the starting quarterback. And even during the season thus far this year, I have been candid enough to say that by the end of the year, I still expect, assuming he's healthy, someone like JT Daniels to be heard from. I'd be surprised if it didn't take place. But the Stetson Bennett numbers the last couple of weeks have been good. Not great, not like the best in college football, but really good and better than Georgia was offensively a year ago. And that's not to disparage anybody who was involved on the field a year ago, but, against not exactly pushover teams, Tennessee and Auburn, although, maybe not great teams right now, but not pushovers. Stetson Bennett has been good. And, yeah, if he goes on the road and beats Alabama, even with the weirdness of this game, there'd be very little left to doubt or ask about him. This is not the story we expected, but thus far, had it been a Jamie Newman, had it been a JT Daniels, I'm not sure I would have had a higher threshold of expectation for the numbers that would have been put up the last couple of weeks. This is still very much a work in progress for Georgia offensively. New offensive coordinator. Georgia was, and I don't mean to be harsh here, but Georgia was abysmal offensively for most of the season last year. Certainly the second half of the season, in some cases, the second 2/3 of the season, Georgia just was not doing anything offensively. And they are at least doing more than that right now. You can still find areas which they need to be better. And, in terms of how they rank in the SEC, for whatever reason, the top part of the SEC has exploded for so much offense this year that it kind of, wrecks the curve a little bit. But I've got very little complaints about the Georgia offense thus far. I am not sure enough if it's good enough to beat Alabama on the road tomorrow. I don't mind telling you that. If Georgia loses, I assume some sort of offensive deficiency will be the reason why. But yeah, I mean, Bennett's the guy you go to battle with tomorrow on the basis of the way that he's played the last couple of weeks, and you give him a chance to kind of go out there and prove that again. And one more thing about this, and I'll take more comments. Bennett's story is not that different from Mac Jones' story, who was only a 3-star or whatever, a second quarterback in the Tua Tagovailoa class, the guy that was probably never supposed to be doing what he's doing for Alabama right now. But at a certain point in time, things just work out different than you expect, and you just process it, move on. That's what Mike Johnson said that Alabama has done when it comes to Jones. They've just accepted him as the guy, even if they initially thought it was going to be one of those 5-stars who was playing this year. I don't like giving Kyle Trask credit for anything because I like being a Gator hater, but Trask was not supposed to be as good as he's turned out to be. A lot of Florida fans probably looked at 2020 and thought it'd be Emory Jones doing all this kind of stuff, and yet it's really Trask, the guy that didn't even start for his high school team, who's doing big things for the Florida Gators right now. So from that standpoint, Bennett at Georgia is actually not even that much of an outlier in the SEC. There are a lot of unexpected storylines with the SEC quarterbacks, and I'm not quite so sure Bennett's performance for Georgia is all that more outlandish than any of the other ones I just mentioned. Epic Robinson laughing about we've got to get ready to go false starts. And yeah, we do have a few of those around here. Let me get a few more comments. Kyle Norton says, who do you give the edge to with the Bama defensive line versus the UGA defensive line versus the Alabama offensive line? I thought Kirby Smart's quote earlier this week about they have weight classes in boxing for a reason. I thought that was telling. This Alabama offensive line is obviously huge. Georgia is not quite as big along the defensive line, but I'm not going to wave a white flag about the Georgia defensive line against the Alabama offensive line on the basis of size alone, because this group is very athletic. And you're talking about the Trayvon Walkers and the Jalen Carters. I think a guy like Carter's potentially very impactful in a game like this because of the athleticism he brings to the table. Watch how Georgia uses him on third down as a, for instance, on that kind of a little bit different lineup position for him. So it's a matchup that probably favors the Alabama offensive line, but it's also an opportunity for Georgia to use what it does well, its speed, its athleticism, to negate the overall brute size of the Alabama group. This is a very good Alabama offensive line, and the one thing I'll always give Bama credit for, and one respect, Steve Sarkisian's a little bit like Lane Kiffin in this respect. They have maintained a running game while also throwing the ball really well. Alabama has become less physical overall. Last year they didn't run the ball particularly well. But this year is a little bit of a throwback to some of those Lane Kiffin offenses, especially the 2015 offense that included Derrick Henry, where they're throwing the ball, they're putting up 1 million yards, but they're running the ball when they need to, and they haven't lost physicality with their offensive line this season. Last year, probably so. This year, they found some of that back, and that's one thing I think you got to give Bama credit for. They have added passing attack without really sacrificing rushing attack, at least if you want to look at 2020 here right now. John Rhodes would love to see a special team score. Yeah, me too. Shelton Tucker says he thinks Bama will pass more than run. I could see that. William and Elaine Morgan says all we're asking from Bennett is to play well. I think that's right. I don't think Bennett has to be the sole reason why Georgia wins. And if Georgia loses, I don't think he'll be the sole reason that Georgia, that Georgia loses. I think that's probably true. Richard Sheffield says make sure Eddie's wearing a mask. That's good advice, especially considering all the chatter and the rumors that are going on, how contaminated that Alabama press box area might be around those coaches' boxes. You better be careful around that. Jim Dixon wants to see a solid start. Yeah, I understand that after the little bit of sloppiness at the beginning of the Tennessee game. Hugh Nash says, how about a little tiny commitment chain for Eddie? Yeah, I like the idea of that, too. That's actually a really good idea. That's a very good idea. Barry Watkins says, Dan Lanning, Todd Monken, Matt Luke, and Scott Cochran. That's the reason Georgia wins on Saturday. I love that, and that's a great way to close out our conversation here today. We appreciate all of you being here for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online. Whether it be getting a heating system tuned back up for the winter that's on the way, or getting a water heater replaced, or some sort of electrical issue. Don't be messing around with your electricity. Let experts do that for you. You want to trust R.S. Andrews, find them online at rsandrews.com. Also, check out ajc.com, Atlanta News Now. Great weekend preview, lots of fall events going on. But the big story in Atlanta right now is tonight the Braves can clinch the National League Championship Series and earn a spot in the World Series for the first time since 1999. What an amazing thing that would be. It's been a fun team to watch. Great game last night, bouncing back when it had been an ugly loss before. All kinds of Braves coverage online, ajc.com, as well as the rest of your Atlanta News Now. Y'all, thanks for making this a great week here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. I hope each of you enjoy the game on Saturday. Hope I do too, because that means we got the result we wanted. But either way, we appreciate you letting us provide the coverage for you here this weekend. I'll see you in Tuscaloosa on video tomorrow, and then back here in our DawgNation World Headquarters studios on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Have a great weekend, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.